It is our extreme honor and pleasure to invite Ellen Davis to offer us some words of Torah. Ellen Davis is the Amos Ragan Kearns Distinguished Professor of Bible and Practical Theology at Duke Divinity School. She is the author of 11 books and many articles. Her research interests focus on how biblical interpretation bears on the life of faith communities and their response to urgent public issues, particularly the ecological crisis and interfaith relations. Ellen is a lay Episcopalian and has long been active as a theological consultant and teacher within the Anglican Communion, especially in East Africa. Her current work explores the arts, music, dance, poetry, visual arts, and translation as modes of interpreting Psalms. So thank you, Ellen. We are so honored to have you come speak some words of Torah this morning.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rachel. And thanks to all of you. I'm deeply honored by Rabbi Graber's hospitality and yours in welcoming me to speak on this first Shabbat of Pesach. Rabbi Graber gave me the almost bewildering freedom to talk about anything I wanted concerning Shemot, Exodus, and do it in 15 minutes. So I'm going to cut to the chase here. The calendrical convergence that Jews and Christians experience most years at this time means that we are all turning to this book this week. This book, which is arguably the master narrative of the whole Bible. As in our different ways, we celebrate deliverance. Israel's suffering and deliverance from Egypt is, of course, the overarching theme of the first third of this great book. And so in these few minutes, I'll focus on just one aspect of deliverance that seems especially apt for us to consider, namely the management of fear. Certainly, Torah suggests, if it does not say directly, that fear in various forms, both healthy and unhealthy fear, is a motive force in history. And Israel needs to contend with fear wisely and well in order to get out of Egypt. If that is true in general, and I think it is, then noting how fear drives action in this book may reveal something about how history is unfolding even in our own time. Exodus, Shemot, offers us something like a typology of fear. And so I'm going to talk about three kinds of fear, starting with Pharaoh's crazy fear, groundless, destructive, and self-destructive. There is also natural fear, the kind of fear that sensible people feel when they are dealing with danger, such as a crazed despot. It is the women of Exodus who most clearly exemplify the courage it takes to manage natural fear. And finally, there is the phenomenon of holy fear, Yirat Hashem, which, as you know, is the ordinary biblical term for a healthy regard for who God is. That phrase is incomprehensible to many modern people. But for almost all the biblical writers, Yirat Hashem, fear of God, expresses the wonder that draws us toward God, not the dread that repels us. And so holy fear is the essential basis for wise thinking and faithful human action. Such sane fear is exactly what Pharaoh lacks, as his first words in the book disclose. We have just been told by the narrator at the beginning of the book that the Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, are fruitful and multiplying and filling the earth, the land. And because we have read Bereshit, Genesis, we know that this is good news. God's creational intention for the descendants of Abraham is being fulfilled in Egypt. This family, now a multitudinous people, will be a source of blessing for Egypt and all other nations, as promised to Abraham. But of course, Pharaoh sees it otherwise. And that is the first sign that he is on a collision course with creational reality. Look, he says, the people of Israel vastly outnumber us. That is probably inaccurate, but it is not in the interest of a despot to report the facts. So let's deal with them shrewdly, Pharaoh says. His so-called wise dealing, the murder of Israelite baby boys, shows that he is simultaneously afraid of the Israelites and contemptuous of their very existence. That combination of fear and contempt is the dynamic of genocidal oppression in every age. In this story, infanticide is the chief indicator of how disconnected is Pharaoh's thinking, not only from creational reality, but also from the economic reality that undergirds his power. Slave labor is the indispensable energy source to keep the iron furnace of Egypt running. So we can see, although Pharaoh cannot, that he is headed for both creational and imperial catastrophe. The long plague narrative shows the undoing of Egypt's beautiful ecosystems, dismantled one by one, starting with the life-giving river turning to blood. Possibly the most arresting line in the whole long narrative of disaster comes from Pharaoh's own advisors. On the brink of the 8th plague, the plague of locusts, the royal courtiers say to Pharaoh, "Let the people go. Haterem teda ki avda Mitzrayim." Do you still not know that Egypt is lost? It's vanished. It's history. This place, our place, has vanished. In that poignant, bewildered outcry, I hear the echo of laments in our own time, from scientists, culture critics, a few stray theologians, and now youth all over the world saying to the powerful, do you still not know Haterem Teda, that our place, the earth as we once knew it, has vanished? And the Exodus story confronts us with the question, will we change our ways now? The plague on the firstborn brought death into every Egyptian household, including Pharaoh's own, but still he did not stop, until finally the ruler of Egypt and his army lay drowned at the Red Sea. Pharaoh is one of the most brilliantly drawn characters in the Bible. His portrayal is so vivid that it invites comparison with such crazed modern tyrants as are known to us. But Pharaoh in Exodus is more than just an individual despot. Have you noticed that this Pharaoh is never named, unlike most other kings in the Bible? And so Pharaoh stands in for the empire of Egypt itself, the whole system of domination that is essentially opposed to God's plan for creation. And for that very reason, it vanishes beneath the waters of the Red Sea. This is something for us to ponder, implicated as we all are in another vast and destructive transnational empire that is heedless of human life and ecological cost. Few of us know an alternative to that system. We have gotten used to it. In the language of Exodus, we have hardened our hearts. But does the story also point to the exits, in the phrase of one scientist I know? Does it offer any hope that humans might yet act with genuine wisdom in our economic, industrial, and social practices, thus at least mitigating the worst effects of the crisis we have precipitated? I think so. And so I'll briefly outline the operation of two healthy kinds of fear and the sort of hopeful action they generate in this story. The great practitioners of hope in the book of Exodus are all women. This point is important because here and elsewhere in the Bible, women characters are usually people who exercise little social power. A side note that I don't have time to defend, so I have to ask you to trust me. Most biblical women stand for all the ordinary people of whatever gender who do not get to shape history, or so it seems. But in fact, in this book, we see change happening precisely through women who are practitioners of faith, hope, and love. First among them are the midwives, working with the enslaved population. Women who fear God, we are told, and therefore they refuse to murder the babes, presumably at the risk of their own lives. That is holy fear at work. Next, Moses' mother and his sister. Natural fear of Pharaoh's diabolical decree, fear for the beloved boy child, moves them to build a little teva, an ark, and launch Moses into an unimaginable future. And then there's Pharaoh's daughter, who has high status, but no public power independent of her monstrous father. Nonetheless, she dares to bring into the tyrant's palace a baby sentenced to death for the crime of his ethnicity. And somehow, against all odds, she raises him to be a compassionate man. Thus, she too has a crucial role in opening up the future. These women do not stop Pharaoh from destroying Egypt, nor from murdering countless Israelite children. The Bible is not fantasy literature. Destructive power is real, and its effects are tragically permanent. And yet, by their actions, these powerful women, mostly of low social status, few of them have names, open up a new world of possibility that has God as its center and motive force. Let's end our overview of Israel's deliverance by looking at the moment when the whole people makes a decisive turn toward the God who brought them out of Egypt. It happens between one shore of the Red Sea and the other. You know the story. As they approach the sea, Israel is gripped by natural fear. As Pharaoh drew near, the Israelites looked and whoa, hine, Egypt is coming on right behind them. And they were very afraid. And then suddenly the sea opens. The people pass through. And this is how the story ends. And Israel saw Egypt dead on the seashore. Israel saw Hayat Gdolah, the great hand, the great active power that Hashem had performed against Israel. And the people feared Hashem, and they trusted in Hashem and in Moses, his servant. Notice, the people don't just relax and throw a party on the far side of the sea. In fact, they are still afraid. But now the focus of their fear is God. And this new fear is associated not with dread, but with trust. And they trusted in Hashem and in Moses, his servant. This is the pivot point in the whole history of Israel. Every hope that the biblical writers hold out stems from this moment when Israel ceases to be dominated by natural fear. In this case, fear of the tyrant who seems to hold all the cards, and relocates its fear in God. Fear of God is nothing other than knowing where the real power in the universe resides and acting on that knowledge. So fear of God is the diametric opposite of arrogance, of recklessness, of moral blindness. In short, fear of God is the opposite of pharaonic insanity. Could it be that in our own time, the future of humanity depends on our learning such sane fear of the eternal, which sets us on the way that one psalmist calls, in a beautiful phrase, derech olam, the way that is forever. May we and our children walk that way together, even in our time.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Professor Ellen Davis for adding so meaningfully and beautifully to our holiday. We really, really appreciate it. Gorgeous.